In recent weeks, a term has been spreading like wildfire: de-dollarization. The United States dollar, long the most prevalent traded currency in the world, is slated by America's rivals and foes to be doomed, following an announcement made by BRICS that they're planning to create their own currency, one that will allegedly blow the dollar out of the water. But is this really the case? To understand why many believe de-dollarization is imminent, it's worth looking at what created the very situation where the United States dollar became so strong to begin with. Following the United States overtaking the British Empire to become the predominant global power, the US economy had proven itself a strong contender on the world stage, and as time would go on through recent decades, the US dollar would become the most secure currency for foreign reserves, the national equivalent of a savings account, and be traded in such high volume outside of the United States to make it be considered the global standard currency. Now, this does benefit America in a number of ways, but the US economy is not based entirely on the dollar's performance so much as the dollar is based on the United States economy's performance. The US dollar becoming the world standard currency came following the success of the US economy and not vice versa. And therefore, while some countries turning away from the dollar may have some impact on the United States economy, it would not have the doom and gloom effect that many of America's rivals and enemies wish that it would have. So it's important not to understate how successful the dollar has been and how strong it is today. Around 60% of the world's entire debt is in dollars. 90% of all global transactions take place in the dollar. And when we look at the United States Stock Exchange, it's the biggest and the richest in the world. When it comes to currency, the dollar wins hands down. Even when we look at the Asia Pacific region, 74% of all trade in a region is done in the United States dollar, showing how China's influence in the region is vastly overestimated by many. Now, much of this began when BRICS announced that they plan on producing their own independent currency, a currency which the members of that bloc would be trading instead of using the dollar. With an economy like China, it starts to get attention from world experts. What's really happening here? Now, the issue is that the Chinese currency has long been pegged to the dollar and long relied upon its relationship with the dollar for much of China's economic success. For BRICS to be a successful contender for one of the world's reserve currencies, it would need to be a proven currency backed by stable governments, ones that aren't typically authoritarian governments with questionable interests at best. Now, when we look at a group with countries such as South Africa, or Brazil with its well-known crime issue, or India with 360 million people living in poverty, it's easy to see why there will be many questions behind how trustworthy a BRICS currency truly could be. This question becomes even more prevalent when we look at how the BRICS nations actually get on with each other. India and China, the two blocs that make up the large portion of the population of BRICS countries, are huge rivals. In recent years, they've been having battles at their border with sticks and stones, the likes out of the medieval era, and hundreds have died as a result of these skirmishes. As well as this, recently with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China and many other BRICS members voted against Russia in the United Nations, considering their view on whether or not Russia was right to invade or not. It's quite clear that BRICS isn't the very united force that many of its fans wish it was. BRICS is made up from countries across the world and varying different continents, different cultures, different languages, and different economies. It simply cannot be viewed as it's just going to make a currency and that's just going to wipe the dollar off the floor. Because what's important to note is a lot of BRICS countries, while they have very large populations and therefore have influence, they don't make up as much of the world economy as many may think. When we look at the global GDP, BRICS makes up around 24% of this. NATO, as an example, though it's not an economic alliance and more a military one, a good example of the Western Bloc, it shows that this holds around 50% of global GDP. As well as this, BRICS only makes up around 16% of global trade, whereas again NATO makes up more around 50%. This can also be seen in BRICS' largest economy, China. Many who think China is about to overtake America seem to have forgotten that around 20 to 30% of China's GDP is based entirely on real estate, a sector which has been crashing recently in China, with many ghost cities being turned to dust. So BRICS is showing many cracks and isn't as strong as many think. So how could a currency being created by this bloc of misfit nations rival the dollar? Well, this would require the countries that trade in the dollar to go for that currency. But the issue with this is for countries to decide to trade in a currency other than the dollar, the most proven secure currency, they would need to see a currency which can rival that stability that the dollar provides. And it's very unlikely that a simple announcement by BRICS can change this. In fact, it's very uncertain how this currency will actually go ahead. Now, there's a number of nations like Saudi Arabia, while not a BRICS member, are starting to say they will take other currencies to trade oil. This doesn't mean that countries buying oil are immediately going to abandon the dollar. Again, the dollar's own strength is its strength. The dollar's stability is why so many countries use the dollar. While everyone could turn to the Vietnamese dong, for example, it's simply not likely. So while many countries that are American rivals, countries like Russia and China, may want to make a point and move away from the dollar because it's their rival nation, this doesn't mean that their alternative is going to be greatly successful. The reality is the much more likely scenario is that the dollar is going to be slightly diminished as the dominant global currency, something that the euro managed to do, turning into 20% of global reserve currencies, which is a fairly successful thing. It's unlikely that what is going to happen with the BRICS currency is going to de-dollarize the world or damage the American economy as much as its fans wish it would. Again, for how the European Union has managed to do with the euro, a bloc with much closer cultural, language and geographical relationship with each other, with a much more cohesive bloc with less conflicting interests, the euro's had many problems in itself and has not replaced the American dollar as the world currency. So it's extremely unlikely that BRICS is going to do even as well as the euro did, let alone beat out the dollar. Now, this is something that is happening and being spread around because America is well known for having many enemies that tend to support countries like China and Russia. Now, whenever these countries do something, there are going to be many people that are going to jump on the bandwagon. Anything that these countries announce that could potentially, in a best case scenario, affect the United States is blown way out of proportion. This is why much military equipment that comes from these countries is often vastly overhyped, even if it's not very good. Lastly, it's also very important to note that if a recent announcement had condemned the United States dollar to be a doomed currency and that de-dollarization was imminent and it's going to lose so much value, then the value of the dollar would start to vastly decline. Much of the United States dollar's value is from how it's perceived to be valued in the future. It's much like how stocks work. If people think this thing is going to go vastly downhill, then it's going to start to go downhill already. But the reality is the dollar has been trading fairly stable recently. Last year it had one of the best years on record for performance. And this year, especially since the announcement by BRICS that they're planning to create their own currency, it hasn't gone crazy. The experts who really understand what's happening haven't reacted the way that BRICS fans have themselves. So, in conclusion, it's hard to see how this BRICS currency could really rival the dollar so much. The reality of the situation that we can expect is that it could be an alternative currency that could diminish some of the dollar's power, and we could see perhaps the petrodollar becomes no longer a thing and perhaps the gold standard is returned in regards to that. But the United States economy isn't going anywhere, and the US dollar is likely to remain the world reserve currency, at least the main one. When so much world debt is still in the dollar, And even countries like China, which 16% of China's trade is with America, so they have a lot of dollars at hand, and they don't want to turn that to be worthless. So de-dollarization isn't happening. The world is simply changing as it always will. Different currencies will rise and fall. The dollar, however, is not falling. There's just other options that are now going to become available, and those options haven't proven themselves yet. The US dollar is still going to be viewed as the most stable, strong choice. Maybe the world economies are going to turn around and entrust their foreign currency reserves with the Chinese government or the government of South Africa and Brazil, but that seems quite unlikely. So de-dollarization is just another buzzword in the bandolier of America's enemies, something way overplayed for what it really is. The American dollar isn't going anywhere. The main world economies are going to continue to trade in it because it is a stable currency. The world isn't being forced to use the dollar, and just because some countries in the Far East decide to open their door to different currencies and try and create their own little group currency doesn't mean the rest of the world is just going to drop the dollar at once. That simply isn't how economics works. So ending the video there and onto a little channel update. We recently hit 1,000 subscribers and then 2,000 not long after, so thank you so much guys. It's all down to you when the channel does well. And the last video as of right now has hit about 100,000 views, the best video I've done yet, so thank you so much for that. I'm going to be doing uploads every 2 weeks from now on. It's kind of the way I'm going to try and do things. If I could do more, then I will, but work kind of interrupts that. If you want to go above and beyond supporting the channel, there will be a Patreon link in the description. And other than that, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share the video. And thank you so much for watching. I've been Kubota, and I'll see you next time. Cheers guys.